As you may know, the popular show Ed, Edd and Eddy has been running for a long time. However, between October 7th and 21st, 2003, episode 34 was accidentally released 1 week before it was scheduled to. It was known to some around the office that the primary writer had been sick with the flu, so instead of going on to make episode 34, the show was supposed to replay episode 1. However, at 5 AM Eastern, people reported a very disturbing new episode premiering on Cartoon Network, which some children were unfortunate enough to see. Apparently, the quality of the episode was mediocre when held to the regular standards. The animation was choppy, and the sound was very muffled and constricted. There were also reports of a line running up and down the screen, similar to a crappy VHS tape. The scenery was described as overwhelmingly dark and depressing without changing props and other background objects. Stormy looking. The characters also behaved oddly. Instead of the normal goofy, hijinks-inspired personalities, the viewers complained that they seemed extremely agitated, gratuitously hateful toward each other, and constantly about to begin sobbing after their lines. Also, the protagonist had a very bad lisp. No one knows why, but he spoke with a sexual tone, which further bothered the viewers. I was one of those viewers. The episode began with Eddy walking down the street with Ed. I noted that Double D was missing. There was an angular shot coming from in front of the two to show them walking toward the viewer. Eddy was wearing that angry look he does when something goes wrong. His eyes were red around the irises. Ed looked absolutely forlorn and practically dragged behind Eddy. There were tears in his eyes, which were both lazy and looking in opposite outward directions. Kevin, the serious antagonist, was riding his bike opposite of the Eds, towards them. The shot became blurry, and I heard low moans coming from Eddy before Kevin hit him, which never happened because the screen went to black. The screen then snapped back, and Kevin was again headed toward Eddy. The view was so blurry this time that all I saw was a green blob headed toward a yellow one. Again I heard the low moan, only this time it was greatly overshadowed by loud static, as though the microphone was broken. A claymation sequence of Double D sleeping in Eddy's bed came up. It may have just been the abruptness, but I jumped and shivered. Waking up and getting out of bed, he moved oddly around the circular room, the fast pitter-patter of his footsteps being the only audio. The sound of his steps were very clear as I was shown a bird's-eye view of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Suddenly, Double D began screeching like a fisher cat. He moved wildly around the cell of a room, faster and faster, until the screen began to blur again, the purple room's color swallowing what was now an orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddy's front door sat in absolute silence for a maddeningly long time. At least 2 minutes of dead silence, and a door. Next, I saw Jimmy and Sarah at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. Jimmy, who was obstructed from view by a hanging lamp, was loudly crying, while Sarah tried to comfort him in an unusually warm fashion. "It hurts, Sarah. It hurts." Suddenly, the door of the room was smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't shown because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room, and Jimmy was shown. His headgear was mangled. The front bent upward, stretching his lip to the breaking point. The front of his gums trickled blood, and teeth were missing. The most disturbing part was that apparently he had lost both arms and legs beforehand, and sat a paraplegic. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion that the others had beaten him up and bent his headgear. The camera stayed on his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Then commercials came on. Afterwards, I was instantly assaulted with a very hairy Rolf in his darkened shed, fisting the cow repeatedly. The visual looped and became blurry again as the scene panned out. Naz was then reading a magazine on her couch. with the quality back to normal. Eddy was then shown alone, without Ed. The quality declined worse than before as he continued to walk. The sun lightened the mood somewhat as he smiled and began to run. The door was shown again, and I saw through Eddy's eyes as he reached out and opened it. His house was nice and bright, but a very badly played violin was blaring. It was the only audio in the scene as he made his way through the house. Eddy then opened the door to his room. Johnny was shown under Naz's couch cushion as he crawled out on all fours in a comedic way and popped up behind her. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes, and I thought of a mole. But I stopped laughing as he started swallowing her head. It was still in a cartoonish fashion, of course, but something was off. He and she stayed like that until she started kicking and struggling. Johnny held her like that until she went limp. A zoom in on his face revealed extremely small human eyes. Double D was laying on Eddy's floor, no longer in claymation. The camera showed Eddy's house for the remainder of the episode, and the next program began on the spot.